What's going on, everybody? My name is Derek. Welcome to my channel. So we're going to dig a little deeper today. As you saw in my title and my thumbnail, yes, I'm going to talk a little bit about my history with alcohol. There's a lot to unpack, nothing that I can do in a 20 minute video. But what made me want to do this video, as I am always trying to do when it comes to these videos, is pull off of something that's kind of inspired me in the moment, and something that I relate to. So for context, I was on a podcast yesterday. The podcast is called Ideally, and it's hosted by a good friend of mine. His name is Alec Og, and he's actually another podcast producer like myself here locally. He's got a great little studio office in Memphis, right downtown. And he and I met a couple years ago through referrals, and next thing you know, we just became friends. It was nice to finally meet another producer. Rather than become, competitors, we quickly started helping each other. We were just happy to know someone else, another peer in our industry. So we actually meet weekly on Zoom calls. We just help each other out in this industry of podcasting. So I've had him on my podcast, PodLogix, where we talked about how to monetize podcasts. And then he invited me on his podcast. Now, his podcast is more about entrepreneurs that deal with ADD, ADHD, and really just entrepreneurial stories in general too, but with the emphasis of how to cope being a business owner with ADD or ADHD. But we always talked about me going on a show. Finally, it happened. I do not know if I have ADD or ADHD. I went more to talk about being an entrepreneur, and he's a good friend of mine, so we really wanted to have fun and do a show together. So I get to the studio, and we start mapping out kind of what we want to talk about. We start the show, and typically when you're interviewed on a show like this where they're trying to get my story, I've done other interviews like this for other podcasts where they want to get my story, and for whatever reason, we opened up the alcohol book. And part of why they want your story is before I jump in on telling how a listener how to start a business and start getting into all the X's and O's of things, you want to give the listener some context, some substance on who you are. Show that vulnerability, and in sales terms, you gain people's like, and they know you now, they trust you. But in genuine terms, it's just being open and showing an audience that you're genuine, and that helps. And people like that. So that's why when you're interviewed for entrepreneur-based kind of podcasts, they want to hear your story before they start hearing about how you succeeded in business. So this is not the first time I do it, but for some reason, yesterday we really unwrapped the alcohol side of things. And he and Alec kept asking me more about that. And I opened up more about it and talked about my time where I went to rehab, things that I will also talk about here too. But I got me thinking. I was like, well, you know what? I feel inspired to talk about that, and also for the sake of continuing to plow through adversity and not being shy about opening up about things. Because at the end of the day, there's a lot of people that deal with alcohol problems, alcoholism, and I think it's good to talk about, period. No one should feel ashamed to talk about your addiction, whether it's alcohol or any other drug. It's important that you talk about it. So I'm going to talk about it. So I felt like a good place to start is the beginning. And the reason why is because what I've discovered through sobriety, by the way, 7.5 years coming up this month as I tape this in November of 2021. November 19th is my half year. Yes, I count half years. So I'm close to 7.5 years. And it's part of the process is looking backwards and seeing mistakes that you made, or things just get clearer while you're also looking forward and wanting to just, you want to leave the past behind because you're moving forward and you're not going to let triggers stop you or anxiety or fears stop you from now really trying to tackle and get your life straight. But you're also looking, behind to help kind of make sense of how you got to where you got. And you start connecting dots, and then you start realizing, like, oh, okay, this here kind of caused this moment in my life, which then connected to me making these poor decisions, which then caused these problems. And you can start seeing that thread. Then it starts over. You quit drinking, and it starts over. So, the 1 year sober Derek is, and the 7 year sober Derek is vastly different. When I was sober 1 year, I only had 1 year to look back on what my sobriety was like. But you stick to it, and you keep growing and growing and growing, and you mature. So now I'm 7.5 years. I look at sobriety years like dog years. So I was reborn 7 years in. Now I'm like a mature 34-year-old. Where when I was drinking, and when I was actually 34, I was like 18 going on 19 is really how I was. But I digress. There's a process to looking backwards. And it hit me a while ago. And I discovered when I became an alcoholic. And it's not what you think. Sometimes you think, oh, it's when I got that DUI. That's when I knew I had a problem. Or when my job started suspending me because I was calling out sick often, when in reality it was because you were hungover and just didn't want to get to work, or you're just being irresponsible. That's when I knew I had a problem. Well, in real time, yeah, I had moments where I felt like, I have a problem. And those are all kinds of stories I can tell. When I really think about it, I realized that, I was an alcoholic after the first time I ever drank. And here's how I know this. It's a memory I'll never forget. It's more a feeling that I'll never forget. So let me paint the picture. It's context time. So I'm 14 years old, and I'm in a party, and it's a chill party. It's not like the parties you see on TV. There was no dancing. There was no girls. It was like 14 to 19-year-old guys that wished there were girls there, and we pretended to be cool. It was really what that was all about. That was the party. Maybe some loud Metallica in the background. I would think that's probably a definite there. But there was alcohol there, and I remember it was a sleepover situation too. So I remember I was really excited. The first time I was at a sleepover situation, and there was going to be beer there, but I certainly didn't have any beer. There was one guy that had beer. He was the oldest one in the bunch. He was not 21, but somehow he had the connection. And me and some of my other friends that were the youngest in the group wanted to drink. We wanted to try it. And the older kids were like, whatever. They kind of didn't want to include us, but we kept hounding them, like, come on, give me a beer. Give me a beer, So they did. And I was given, I think, 2 beers. And instantly loved it. Instantly. Just loved the taste of it, loved how it made me feel. And I remember, I take it back, it was 3. Because I remember this because when I was wrapping up my second beer, my buddy was still on his first beer. So I look back on that and be like, that would be a common trend and thread through my entire drinking years. Was always the guy that drank the most. So that, bam, right out of the gate. And here's the next red flag that I can see looking back is I actually felt some anxiety when I finished my second beer, knowing that I only had one left. That gave me anxiety. I can still feel it to this day. Like, I can feel how I felt then because I've felt it so many times since then, especially when I started getting into other stuff outside of alcohol. Like, when it's one thing to run out, that's awful, but then sometimes you get that anxiety when you're almost out. That's when it's bad. So right out of the gate, 2 red flags. First time drinking, 2 beers into my drinking career. I realized that I was going to be a binge drinker and that I didn't want to run out. So I drink the 3rd beer. Now I'm out. And I start panicking a little bit. I'm upset. I'm like, I'm not bummed out like, oh, well, that was fun. I wish I had more, but, maybe next time. It was like I want another one now. And my buddy that's probably still had one left, I think I asked him, and he's like, no, I'm not giving you my beer. So I remember going to the older fella that had the beer and begged him. Not quite begging on my knees, but like, dude, give me a beer. Just kept getting on him. Dude, can I just have one more beer? Just kind of one more beer? So yeah, I'm begging. He's like, fine, but this is it. And he's not saying this because he's trying to be responsible. He's not looking out for my best interest. He's being selfish, doesn't want to give up any beers. He wants to drink 20, right? So I finally get one. Red flag number 3, the euphoria that I felt when I got that 4th beer and I had a new one. I know that feeling. I can still feel it like it was yesterday. At the time, I didn't know what was going on, but I felt a jolt of adrenaline because I was handed a new beer. I was like, yes, it made me feel safe. Not good. Pounded that beer down, and then it was official. I knew it was over. I knew my night was done, and I didn't have fun the rest of the night. I had other friends that were still having a good time because they instead of pounding all 4 beers or all of their beers in 90 minutes like I probably did, they were more mature in the drinking way, I guess. They knew how to moderate just naturally. They were just drinking a beer and having fun. Whereas I was all about pounding the beer down and drinking it. And then I ran out, and then I wasn't fun. Then I got anxious. I felt awkward socially. It was just a weird night. And then we all ended up passing out or something. And that was it. So that was the first time I drank. And when I look back on it, it makes so much sense. It makes so much sense to me as to why things turned out the way they did and how the kind of drinker I became. It was definitely I was a binge drinker. The last one standing, more often than not, always the last one standing. Took pride in that. Certainly did. And always made sure I didn't run out. But so I felt like opening up about that, telling a little story. Lately, I've been doing these kind of self-help videos where I give tips on how to cope with stress or anxiety. I don't feel qualified to give tips on how to quit drinking. This is a pretty big deal. I have my story as far as when I quit. I did go to rehab in 2014, May 19, 2014. There's a whole story behind that I just don't have time to get into right now, but that will be a video down the road. And I would gather there's a lot of you out there that are interested in alcohol topics because so many people deal with it. And sometimes it's a stigma where it's like some people are afraid to talk about it. I certainly was because sometimes you don't want to admit that you have a problem. So if I was to give one advice, if deep down you feel like, yeah, you have a problem, then you need to just be honest with yourself and realize you have a problem and go get help. Find a therapist. Start seeing a therapist every week. Start talking about it. And that therapist will then point you in the direction you need to be pointed in. And again, I'm not qualified to be that kind of self-help. What I'll say is, admit that you have a problem. It's okay. Get a therapist. And then that person will know what to do for you. So that's it, y'all. Thank you so much. The move has, as y'all have seen, has been going well. We're still hanging in there. We're hunkered down in my little apartment here, but things are moving along, and your support's always welcomed. And thank you for your kind words and comments, both here and my Facebook group, which you can find on Facebook. My name, Derek Michaud, is my group. Come on in. Would love to have you there. And till next time, y'all have a good night. Thank you.